For all the uproar over Roseanne's racist tweet, the media have been far more restrained over another outrage. Samantha Bee, the host of Full Frontal on TBS, went off on the president's daughter, as you know, for the sin of posting a picture with her child with the worst word in the English language that you can use against a woman.
You know, Ivanka, that's a beautiful photo of you and your child, but let me just say, one mother to another, do something about your dad's immigration practices, you feckless. He listens to you. Put on something tight and low cut and tell your father to stop it.
After the White House denounced her, Bee said this on Twitter: "I'd like to sincerely apologize to Ivanka Trump and to my viewers for using an expletive on my show to describe her last night. It was inappropriate and inexcusable. I crossed the line and I deeply regret it." Joining us now, Emily Jashinsky, commentary writer for The Washington Examiner, and Richard Fowler, radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. Emily, until the White House denounced Sam Bee's language as vicious and vile, I read all the media reports on this. They were all like, wow, did you see what Sam said? Yeah. Not reaching the Roseanne level of outrage until maybe later.
Some of the initial media reports were almost like, in some of the liberal outlets, were almost applauding her, like, oh, this is kind of funny. And so that was really interesting. And I actually don't think, I'm glad you played the second part of that clip, because most people stopped it after she used that word. Yes. And it goes on to get, I mean, I think also very inappropriate. And so what's interesting about all of this is I don't think Samantha Bee would have ever had to apologize. I don't think we would still be talking about this. I certainly don't think she would have had the will to apologize if it hadn't happened in such proximity to the Roseanne Barr incident.
Which actually makes it all the more, I guess stupid would be the right word, to do that and do it in a pre-taped segment. And by the way, you know, they were initially proud of it. The executive producer, Miles Kahn, wrote, "So, feckless C word seems to be trending." Now, some others have denounced it, CNN's Brooke Baldwin and others, but do you think she would still be employed if she had used that awful word against, I don't know, Michelle Obama?
Well, I mean, I think the word is vile, right? Let's start there. And, and I think what makes it even more interesting is I think you're right, Howard, in that the only reason why we're having this conversation about Samantha Bee is because it happens so close to Roseanne, which has allowed conservatives to point to this double standard. But I don't think you can conflate the two cases, and the Roseanne case in particular. And if you talk to folks at ABC, they will tell you that Roseanne, not only does she have a history of bad behavior, but since getting the show, she has been warned about her behavior over and over and over again. So this is like sort of the third strike for Roseanne, which allowed them to say, you're out the door. In Samantha Bee's situation, is her language vile? Absolutely. But the case is different here because we don't know what is happening between her and the TBS executives. But is it vile? Is it wrong? Is there a double standard that the conservatives can point to? I think there might be here.
I agree that they're different. But I don't think that lets Samantha Bee off the hook. And especially you pointed to the second part where she says, put on something tight and low cut and tell your father to change his effing immigration policy. That is the same low blow that Bill Maher did a few while back about joking about an incestuous relationship. And somehow, like, it's okay to do that to the president's daughter?
Yeah, actually, none of this was a dramatic departure from the way a lot of liberals in the media talk about the relationship between Ivanka and Donald Trump. And so I do think that these are not apples to apples. I think what Roseanne said absolutely was worse. But in the same way, they are different because what Samantha Bee said went through layers of bureaucracy. It was written down. It was very much premeditated, which makes it very different in another way as well.
All right. Let me move on to the case of Joy Reid, MSNBC weekend host, and she had already apologized for some decade-old posts on her blog that were very, very homophobic, I mean, really offensively homophobic. And now she's apologized again, among other things. She seems to have been years ago a 9/11 truther. She was promoting an Alex Jones film, charging that the 9/11 attacks were carried out by the U.S. government. Richard?
I mean, I think the blog post is pretty insane. Here's my thought on this particular case. I do believe that everybody has a past, and everybody's past is murky, depending upon how you spin it or how you look at it. I do believe that Joy should have a chance to explain herself, but I do think that the rope here is running a little short, and she's running out of rope, and so I think she's got to explain herself pretty quickly to the American
But on that point, she did again apologize online, but said nothing on her show yesterday about this. She certainly had that platform, and you know, let's put up a picture that she had posted. It was a Photoshop thing involving John McCain, sort of grafted onto the Virginia Tech shooter. And so MSNBC says in a statement, well, you know, some of this is hateful, but she's grown and evolved. no real accountability. I mean, it's a long time ago, but there's so much of it, Emily.
Yes. And at first, I was willing to give her the benefit of the doubt and say, you have evolved. We should absolutely have room for that. It's been more than 10 years in some of these cases, but it's turned out to be so much. And the worst part, and what I cannot wrap my head around, is the fact that she pretty much clearly fabricated a cover-up story about hackers, and she's supposed to be a journalist, and MSNBC is running ads touting her as one of their stars, one of their star journalists, and still hasn't gotten around
even
that.
You would probably say that if somebody had said half of this stuff who worked for a conservative news organization, there would be a far bigger uproar than there's been about Joy Reid.
Well, let me say this from a broader context. I think we're currently living in a society where it's become so tit for tat that is like everybody deserves. It's like almost like Oprah, but instead of like handing out cards or handing out red slips, like you get fired, everybody gets fired.
Well, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the culture.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we've got to at some point in our country and in our culture, we've got to come to this point of reckoning that says what's fireable and what's not fireable, because now it's become on the left and on the right. It's you're fired. We want somebody fired. And everybody's getting fired.
It's sort of up
we're
to
not really sure why.
To the news organization involved. But when President Trump says Disney has a double standard because they did fire Roseanne on its ABC unit, ESPN, which is owned by Disney, took no action against Jamel Hill, the sportscaster, when she called Donald Trump a white supremacist. And then Keith Olbermann has just been given an expanded role on ESPN. Here is just some of what he has said about the president.
Trump is indeed effing crazy. As mindless and as evil as the baboon's policy is, it can and will be rolled back sooner or later. Congenital disease, drug use, any of a dozen post-concussion traumas, Alzheimer's, senility.
Now, Olbermann didn't say this on ESPN, but that's okay with Bob Iger, and Olbermann gets a bigger role on the sports network?
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with this larger point about partisan bloodthirst and the tit-for-tat battle. I definitely agree with that. But if what Joy Reid has done is not, when we're trying to find this line as to what's fireable, if that's not fireable, what is? I mean.
But Olbermann, you know, who used to command a big audience on MSNBC, he's called Trump a Nazi and a traitor, and it doesn't seem to hurt his career.
Well, I mean, listen, I think Keith Olbermann is problematic. I think that language is problematic. But I really feel as though, and going back to my previous point, is we as a country have to figure out, one, we've got to bring civility back. I think it's somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean right now.
All right, I'm good on that. But you can't impose a standard because every media organization has to search its conscience.
Absolutely.
When a star does this.
And how are we supposed to get back to civility when Samantha Bee is getting awards for advancing social causes? I mean, she got an award the other night, and she accepted it for advancing.
I think she's sorry for the word, but I don't think she's sorry for the sentiment involved, and I think that's troubling. Great discussion. Richard Fowler, Emily Jashinsky. There's a lot more reporting on pundits and comedians sliming Ivanka, by the way. My book, Media Madness, Donald Trump, the Press, and the War Over the Truth. I really go into it.